right. We're on Daf Bet Amud Bet. Last week we learned Tosfot. We're going to go back into the Gemara now, and the reason we need a Tanakh is because you'll see shortly the discussion tonight, which we could just fly through on the surface level, but we're not in a rush. We want to understand what are they driving at in the Tanakh, and one part in particular. If you don't see it inside, it'll be very bamboozling very quickly. So I thought it would just be simpler to see it inside. Tonight's topic is, when is the new year for Jewish kings? How do we know it's Nisan? So the easy answer is always, we know, it's our Masorah. We know that that's what it is. But the Gemara did not take that assumption. Let me zoom out for a minute. There are 4 Rosh Hashanahs, 4 Rosh Hashanah, right? The first one, which is what we're focused on, is Nisan. Rosh Hashanah for kings. That's in the Mishnah. That's the Psak. The beginning topic was, why should we care? And the answer had to do with Shtar Mukdam, Shtar Ma'uchar, encumbered property. Remember? That whole discussion. The second topic, then the subtopic is, well, what about the borderline? King died, a new king arrived in the month of Adar, in the month of Nisan. What if the second king was the son of the first king? Is there a continuity? And therefore we know who it's going to be. It's not a secret. So why are we waiting for the next year? And in that intervening overlapping year, the year that the first king died and the second king took over, you could date things either way. Say, we know who the new king is going to be, so who cares? No, we have to wait for the rule was you have to wait for the coronation. And whenever the coronation happens, once you hit Aleph Nisan, the first time you hit it, that's the new year for the king. And it doesn't matter if that's 2 days later or if it's a full year later, okay? So we talked about all those sugyas. Tonight's topic is, wait, how do we know that it's Nisan? Now, to us, it's a no-brainer. The Mishnah said so, but that's kind of circular. The Gemara wants to try to analyze what the backstory might be as to how we got to that idea. And are there other contenders? Now, it's going to be hard for us to figure out other contenders because we already know the answer is it's Nisan. But the Gemara will systematically, or actually, it will feel not systematic, but the Gemara will go through umpteen different possibilities of other months that it could be. And what we'll try to do is unpack the logic of why those Havaminas exist and why they actually fall apart. Okay.
I'm sorry. Your question makes sense to me. Why Nisan? What is Nisan in the calendar?
No,
year?
is Nisan really that first month? We know there has to be a month that's Rosh Hashanah for Malachim. How did Chazal? Why did this Mishnah say that?
How did they pick Nisan?
Yeah, why? How and why? Or Shvat or whatever. Why?
That could be said of all 4 of our
But since we're at the beginning of the Mishnah, that's what we're focused on, right? When we get to no, it's okay. When we get to the one on Shvat, we get to the one of Shvat, Aleph Shvat, Tu B'Shvat. That's going to be about an agricultural moment. But when we talk about Aleph Nisan, it's not agricultural. It has to do with kings. So why? What we won't get to tonight, so you can't ask me that tonight. It's like out of bounds. What about non-Jewish kings? That's going to be the next sugya, which we won't get to next week either, because next week we'll have to focus yet more deeply on this. Now we're going to lay the groundwork, and next week goes deeper.
But we know from this fine book here that Nisan is the first month
of the biblical months. Right. The biblical months we know starts, or the first of the biblical months is counted from Nisan. It sounds that way. HaChodesh Zelachem, Rosh Chodashim, it's the start. We call it Nisan, right? The Chodshei Hashanah, right? Rishon LeChodshei Hashanah. But then the question, which is why that's not a good enough proof, is who said that just because it's the beginning of the months means you're going to count the years of certain things according to that. So, for example, when's Rosh Hashanah? In the 7th month. So if you're counting what year is it, you don't count by Nisan, you count by Tishrei. Even though in the Bible, it's called number 7, but that's the cutoff line for Rosh Hashanah. So the question, okay, so why is the cutoff time for kings, specifically in Nisan, not in some other month? Spoiler alert, not for our sugya, but the next sugya is going to be, well, isn't it true that, so we're going to start in that accusatory way, isn't it true that in the non-Jewish world, the kings actually are enumerated from the fall, from Tishrei? Isn't that true? So why is there a discrepancy? That's not our sugya tonight. Our sugya is, if you look with me in the Gemara, enough introduction, the first word on the line is Kuf Mem Lamed, Kamash Malan, halfway down 2b, Bet Amud Bet, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Minayim Malachim Shein Monim Lahem Elam Nisan. How do we know that the kings enumerate their years from Nisan? Answer, and we'll look this up in just a minute. Vayhi b'shmonim shana v'arbameot shana l'tzei b'nei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim v'shana haravi'it b'chodesh Ziv hu hachodesh hasheni l'melech Shlomo al Yisrael. That's a long pasuk we'll look up in a minute, but Mekish Malchut Shlomo Yetziat Mitzrayim. In this pasuk, leaving Egypt and the kingdom of Shlomo are connected to each other. Ma Yetziat Mitzrayim min Nisan, af Malchut Shlomo min Nisan. Since one is in Nisan, Yetziat Mitzrayim for sure was in the month of Nisan, also known as the first of the months of the year, and that's a starting point. So too, the king's starting point must be in the same month. That's the opening gambit. Now, a quick review of Sefer Malachim Aleph, which we will be opening this Shabbos as the Haftorah, unless it's Mach Chodesh, not Mach Chodesh. So we say that's the Haftorah, right? Beginning opening scene. Melech David Zakein. It's going to be about David being asked pointedly by Bathsheba and then Natan Navi, is Adoniah supposed to be the king? And what does he say? No, of course not. Well, then why is he celebrating that he's the king? I thought it's going to be Shlomo. Bathsheba says, I thought it's going to be our son Shlomo. And David says, I take an oath. That's who the continuity will be with. That's chapter 1. Chapter 2, let's say the selection of Shlomo and the coronation of Shlomo, the removal of Adoniah, and that removal at first does not involve him dying, but eventually he does end up getting killed. But in chapter 2, David gives his final instructions to Shlomo HaMelech, also a Haftorah, not for now. In chapter 2, the whole story involving Adoniah and Bathsheba and Shlomo, not for now. Chapter 3 is Shlomo wedding this one and that one. God loves Shlomo, and God appears to Shlomo and asks him whatever he would like. And what does Shlomo ask for? Wisdom. That's where he gets his wisdom. He wants the chachma and the leiv chacham v'navon, and that's what he gets. In chapter 4, he already decides that he is going to start building the Beit HaMikdash, essentially. The time has come. First, it tells us all the people who are in chapter 4 is really the people who are his in his retinue, etc. Sorry, page 407 in the Koren Tanakh Hebrew English, the one that I'm using. I'm in 1 Kings chapter 4, chapter 5, telling you about his power and the fact that he has a lot to recommend him. And he decides in chapter 5 that he is embarking on building the Beit HaMikdash, and he has a friend named Hiram, who's up in what we call today Lebanon, and they have a pact, and he's going to help him, etc. Okay, and all of that is the precursor to, and they're going to bring the materials, whatever hasn't already been brought by David. If you look in the Bible, chapter 6, verse 1, that's the pasuk we came for. He did not build it in 1 month, but he embarked on the building. He decided he was going to embark on the building, I should say, at that time. Okay, so you see, it is the only place. It's the first place. In fact, I think it's one of the only places, if I'm not mistaken, in Tanakh, 409 in the Quran, 409, chapter 6, verse 1. It tells you the actual number of years since Yetziat Mitzrayim in the pasuk, and it makes reference to the fact that it is the 4th year of King Shlomo. 4th year of King Shlomo was 480 years since Yetziat Mitzrayim. Why is he using Yetziat Mitzrayim as a reference point? Oh, says the Gemara, because it must be the same thing. When Yetziat Mitzrayim's month arrives, that's also the beginning of the reign of Shlomo. That's the crossing over point to the new year. And that must be what it is. And the Chodesh is Chodesh Ziv. It's called Chodesh Ziv, which some will understand that that's Chodesh Iyar. Hua Chodesh Hasheni, 2nd month. Limloch, Shlomo al Yisrael, and Shlomo built the house for God. That's the positive. Leave the Tanakh open. We have to see a bunch of other psukim. But just to give you the idea, the Navi itself, for the first time, has linked the year of a king with the year since Yetziat Mitzrayim. 480 years since Yetziat Mitzrayim is year 4 of the reign of Shlomo. One of the things that I am guilty of myself, I've said a few times in the Navi class, is I'll just line up, David reigned for 40 years and Shlomo reigned for 40 years. Oh, so that's 80 years. Well, it's not really, because they're overlapping. Exactly. The last year of David and the first year of Shlomo are overlapping. So you keep losing a couple of years with the kings, right? And if Right.
The next Nisan.
Exactly. And if there are 2 or 3 kings in the same span of a year, there is a period of upheaval in Malchut Yisrael. 1, 2, 3. It goes through 2 people, 3 people. Could all be in the same years. They're all overlapping. They all reign for 1 year, but this one 3 months, that one 4 months, that one 2 months. Okay, so and then the guy with 2 months at the end, it goes through Nisan. Okay, he's already in year 2. He only got 2.5 months under his belt, but you give it to he's in year 2. That's how the dating works. So that's what we're looking at here. That's what this pasuk is. So the Gemara says that's the thesis. Rabbi Yochanan says that's how we know it's Nisan. Why is Nisan Rosh Hashanah Malachim? Simple. There's actually a pasuk in the Mikra, Sefer Malachim, Perak Avav, Malachim Aleph, Perak Vav. It says so, and that's it. QED, right? We've arrived.
When he was anointed.
It doesn't say this is the 4th year, right? This is the 4th year of his reign. If you look at Rashi B'chor Ziv, right across the hall over here on the left hand side, B'chor Ziv, Hu Iyar, Kidam Afarish Kra, Hu Achodesh Hasheni. Well, V'amrin in the Kaman, Nisan Rosh Hashanah L'Seder Min Chodashim, and later on, the Gemara will say Nisan is Rosh Hashanah for the count of the months. I mean, we knew that already because Mark already reminded us. It says so, and Judah said. So it says Rosh Chodashim, and for the biblical months. All the months are ordered. There are no names to the months in the Torah, of course, right? There are no names to the months, by the way, in most of Nach. Only comes up in the later Nevi'im, much later, when they're under foreign rule. The Ramban points out in Parshat Bo and Shemot Yud Bet that the names came from Bavel. We got them from Babylon, even though we darshan them. We darshan a lot of things. So Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, Tammuz, Abel. We're always darshaning things. But that was its source. That's where it came from. We said, okay, so it wasn't an accident. They each have worth, utility, value. So if you look at Rashi, the next Rashi, he gives you also L'melech Shlomo al Yisrael, Limloch Shlomo al Yisrael. Yeah. Limloch Shlomo al Yisrael, you know it's chaser. Ashana Revi'it Kai, it's talking about the 4th year. Umikra Mesurasu. This is a pasuk that in order to read it properly, it's Mesuras means it has to be cut up, means it's formulated in a certain poetic way. You have to read it properly. How do you read it? Bashana Revi'it L'melech Shlomo al Yisrael, Limloch Shlomo al Yisrael, B'chor Ziv Hu HaChodesh Hasheni. Right? And he's telling you, by the way, there's another pasuk like this. Hachinami Ktiv Kra'achrina L'kaman V'yichal Livnot B'chodesh Hasheni Basheni B'shnat Arba L'malchuto. And that's in Divrei Hayamim Bet, Pasuk Gimel. So hold your finger where we are now. We better see that because Rashi told us to look it up. We're going to need that pasuk because it's going to be germane to arguments that will be made shortly against this. Divrei Hayamim Bet is the last book in the printed Tanakh that we have. 2 Chronicles is the book. Divrei Hayamim Bet, like Malachim Aleph, Malachim Bet. Divrei Hayamim has a Divrei Aleph, Divrei Hayamim Bet. There's no rhyme or reason why there's 2. It just was split by somebody. It's no spiritual value to that. Look in chapter 3.
In Aleph or Bet?
I'm in Bet. Chapter 3 is where it's located, and you're looking at what? 987. Look at verse 2. Pasuk Bet. Paragimel Pasuk Bet. So verse 2, chapter 3, verse 2. Vayachal livnot b'chodesh hasheni b'sheni bishnat arba l'malchuto. He completed the building, or he began the building. Sorry. He started the building. That's what we had there before. And the 2nd month, in the 2nd, nobody knows what that other word means till we get there, and the Gemara is going to analyze that, in the 4th year of his reign. So in other words, what is Divrei Hayamim, the book of Chronicles? It's just that. It's like telling the genealogy of Malchut Beit David, Malchut Yehuda, and it starts from Adam. If you open up Divrei Hayamim Aleph, it starts Adam, Shet, it'll give you the names of all the people, so-and-so, Begatu, a whole list. And then it will start zeroing in on David, Shlomo, different kings of Malchut Yehuda. It's a retelling. It's not on the level of Nevuah. It's Ketuvim. That's why it's in the back. It's still part of the Mikra Kodesh. It seems to be, I believe it's Chizkiah and his Bezdin who put it together. Anshe Knesset Agdola had to have had a hand in it because Chizkiah dies in it. So there's people who live after Chizkiah. So, but that's my recollection. But the Anshe Knesset Agdola essentially canonized the whole thing, so they count that also. But Malach Malaf, it's Medin Navi. The point is, there's 2 psukim. Rashi wants you to know there's even another cross-reference later on. We're going to come back to this pasuk in a few minutes as well. That's going to be referencing this idea. Yeah.
So real quick, so I'm not sure I understand, but Chodesh Hasheni Basheni.
I told you the word Basheni nobody understands on the pshat. We're going to see in the Gemara. It's going to say, why does it say Basheni? What does that mean? No, it's going to be subject. I'm glad you noticed it. That's part of the analysis we're coming to. Is everyone with me so far? This is just a baseline. Now we're getting into it. Okay. So now, if you keep going here in the Gemara, okay, we just read the pasuk. It's a long pasuk, and the Gemara had said, then the Gemara says as follows, and it's going to be a staggering line because you're going to say, I'm pretty sure I know my parsha. How do you know that the count of years from Yetziat Mitzrayim is in Nisan? Maybe that count is in Tishrei, right? Seems like a klutz kasha. Obviously, you're counting it from when it happened, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But you know that Yetziat Mitzrayim was a process. So let me just throw it out there. Everybody agrees. Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Eliezer have big machloket on Daf Yud Aleph. We didn't get there yet about when things happened, but they both agree that when it came the month of Tishrei in Mitzrayim, the Jews didn't have to work anymore. So maybe that's the count time. And since that is, at least according to one of those opinions, the time of the creation of the world, maybe they got out in Nisan. That's the anniversary. That's when we're going to have Pesach. But when you're counting years, when Tishrei arrives, maybe it's already the second year from Yetziat Mitzrayim. How come? Well, if we paskin that the world was created in Tishrei, then it would make a lot of sense. If the world was created in Nisan, then no. But if the world was created in Tishrei, Rabbi Eliezer holds that way. We seem to hold that way in terms of our liturgy. That's what we say. So if that's true, so maybe, didn't we just finish having a conversation the last 2 weeks? The king was appointed in Adar, but the coronation wasn't until Nisan. So that's the beginning of his reign. Or the coronation was in Adar, hits Nisan. Okay, that's the cutoff time. So now it's in year 2. He only reigned for 28 days. He reigned for 15 days. Okay, but in Chodesh Adar, fine. But now it came to Nisan. So the Gemara suggests maybe the count of Yetziat Mitzrayim. By the way, it doesn't say anything about the Batla Avodat. I'm just giving you an example in the story. Maybe the cutoff time for Yetziat Mitzrayim is 6 months later. What happened 6 months after the Jewish people left Mitzrayim? They left in Nisan. You know what happened in Tishrei? They started building the Mishkan. Maybe that's the date. When are we really free? So you could keep throwing it out there, and the Gemara is going to entertain this. What didn't we say in the Seder? V'hotzeiti, v'hitzalti, v'ga'alti, v'lakachti. So v'ga'alti, I was redeemed. What's v'lakachti? Oh, that's Matan Torah. So maybe the beginning of the count of freedom is really from Matan Torah. Now you may say to me, this doesn't make any sense. The historical time is written in the Torah, and that's when we have Pesach. I don't disagree. The question of the Gemara at hand is, but how do we count time? Is it actually counted from Yetziat Mitzrayim in Nisan? Or is there some later moment that is the signal, okay, now we crossed through a line in time, and now it's the next year since Yetziat Mitzrayim? The Gemara actually entertains it. It's a little bit of a paradigm, more than a paradigm. Or as I was suggesting, even an earlier time. It's not that you're not going to celebrate Pesach and Nisan. Of course you're going to, because that's what Torah says to do. But maybe the count of years in the Bible, in the Torah, is not going according to that actual date of the physical leaving of Mitzrayim, because there was a process. There was a spiritual leaving before, and there was a spiritual leaving that took place after. They took the Jews out of Mitzrayim. They took the Mitzrayim out of the Jews. They had to go to Matan Torah. Then came Chet HaEgel. And so maybe the time clock started again. When did they got Kapara? When did they Kapara? On Yom Kippur. And when did they get Kapara Yom Kippur? What happened after that? They started building the Mishkan. Maybe that's the beginning. Maybe it's when they finished building the Mishkan. All of these are about to be entertained by the Gemara. Let's read it inside. But that's the logic, is just because the event happens at a certain time, or to say it differently, just because the king is coronated in Adar on the 17th day of Adar, that doesn't mean that when he hits Nisan, I'm not going to say it's now year 2. But that's not really the date. It's not a full year. But stop asking that question. We need a line. Maybe the line. The Gemara says maybe it's really in Tishrei. It's a benchmark. Stick with me. Here we go. Oh, I forgot Rashi. I left out the Rashis. We should see it right here. And you'll see right here. Rashi, Mekish Malchut Shlomo. This is back from before. Connecting Malchut Shlomo and Yetziat Mitzrayim. You with me in Rashi? On the side? Le'inyan Minyan Hashem. I'm on the right hand, on the left hand side. Rashi. Dibur Malchut Mekish Malchut Shlomo. The first 2 words in the line, Malchut Shlomo. Mekish Malchut Shlomo. That was from the previous Gemara. I'm sorry, but you have to see it inside. Le'inyan Minyan Hashem. Yetziat Mitzrayim. Shari HaMikra Hazeh, connecting these two, because this pasuk, Manash Shana Zu Shnat Dalad Me'od Shmonim Yetziat Mitzrayim. Excuse me, Uvishnat Arba Limloch Shlomo. It connected year 4 of Shlomo, 480 years since Yetziat Mitzrayim, so clearly the two are related. Ma Yetziat Mitzrayim min Hashem Shimonim la matchilin minisan af machut shlomo minisan. Then the Gemara said, which we just read a moment ago, which was a little bit shocking. Dima mi Tishrei mininan. Maybe we should count Tishrei. What does Rashi say here? Ema mi Tishrei. Alpha pisha yatsa benisan mishigia Tishrei karulo shana shniya. Why? Lefisha Tishrei Rosh Hashanah l'shanim hanimnim lebriat olam v'hu adin liyetziat Mitzrayim. What's the month of creation? By the by, this is going to be debated. Rabbi Yeshua thinks the month of creation is actually Nisan, so he doesn't have an argument here. But according to Rabbi Eliezer and according to our liturgy, Hayom Harat Olam, nobody says it in Nisan. We sing that only on Rosh Hashanah, Tishrei. So Rashi says, since that's the creation of the world and that's the dividing line, how we count years. Maybe that's where we should. That's what the Gemara means, according to Rashi. That's the beginning of the count. And the Gemara, and now it goes on to say, the Gemara says, no, lo sal kadaitach. That's not going to work. You know why? Because we know the date that Aaron Kohen went up to Hor Hahar to die. We know that it was the 5th month. We call it Av, the 5th month on Rosh Chodesh. It says so in the Torah explicitly. It's the only Yetziat in Kol Torah Kula. I mean, in the 5 books of the Torah. There's no other Yetziat. We don't have anything in Torah Shabbat. Torah Shabbat we have a lot, but this is it. One place in the whole written Torah when Aaron died.
But something that's invaluable. It says HaKodesh HaShvi'i. So you have to have a starting place for it to be the 7th.
For the count of months.
Yeah.
The beginning of the count of months is Nisan. Nobody argues on that. So Mark pointed out, Judah pointed out, that's correct. But as you and I both know, when we celebrate Rosh Hashanah is in the 7th month of the year.
Right.
Still the beginning of the year.
Well, it's the beginning of one. It's one of the beginnings of the year.
Fine.
There's 4.
But the beginning of the year to count years of things is Tishrei. Rosh Hashanah l'shanim. So the Gemara wants to know shanim like for Rosh Hashanah purposes, or shanim for tithing purposes, or also shanim for king purposes. And the Gemara says, no, that's from Nisan. Well, how do you know it's in Nisan? We know it's Nisan because that's when Yetziat Mitzrayim was. But maybe the count of Yetziat Mitzrayim in the Torah, even though by months, 1, 2, 3, it's going around 12 months. But maybe once you hit a dividing line in Tishrei, that's already year 2. So the 8th month of the year, the first year they left Egypt, the 8th month was actually in the 8th month of them leaving Egypt, the 2nd year. Maybe that's the Havamina. And the Gemara says that can't be. Why not? Because the Torah gives us the date when Aaron HaKohen died. It says, Vayal Aaron HaKohen el Hor Hahar, al Pi Hashem vayam Hashem bishnat ha'arba'im. Let's say, Bnei Yisrael Eretz Mitzrayim, b'chodesh chamishi, be'echad lachodesh. It says so. And then it says after that, another pasuk, Vayhi ba'arba'im shana ba'ashtei asar chodesh, be'echad lachodesh diber Moshe v'gomer, midekai ba'av, v'kari l'shnat arba'im, v'kai b'shvat, v'kari l'shnat arba'im, Michlad Rosh Hashanah lav Tisrehu. Let me stop here. Let's look at inside. I'm explaining this to you, and I'm happy to take the questions. Look with me in Sefer Bamidbar. Look in chapter 21 of Sefer Bamidbar. I'm going to tell you the page in the Koran Tanakh just to save time. Chapter 20, I'm sorry. Page 186. 186. 186.
How does the death of An get us
What
closer
pasuk?
to Nisan?
What's it?
Let
me see it. Let me show you. I'm going to show you right now. I'm going to show you right now. Can I show you? Show you? Show you? The story. This is the answer to the question. The section we're looking at here in chapter 20 describes the death of Aaron HaKohen. You see it here? Page 186 in the Koran Tanakh, verse 22 through 29. That's the death of Aaron HaKohen. In this iteration of it, which is a method to my madness, why I'm pointing this out, because we're going to come back to this section in a few minutes, so you shouldn't be confused. You see it here? It describes that he died. It doesn't have a date in this section. Okay? But at the end of the book of Bamidbar, there's a Parsha Maseh. That is the travel log. It reviews people, where Klal Yisrael went, 42 stops, and what happened in many of them. Some of them it doesn't mention, but some of them it does. Okay? And in that travel log, it will give us the exact dates. Chapter 33 in the book of Bamidbar. A lot of exercise tonight. I'm on page 204. Okay,
That-
204. It's a pasuk exactly. Pasuk Lamed Chet, verse 38. Parak Lamed Gimel, pasuk Lamed Chet. Okay. Now this is how the Gemara will explain what's going on. And watch. Look at this pasuk. It's the only yurtzeit in Tanakh. Excuse me, in the Torah. Vayal Aaron Kohen el Horahar Pi Hashem Vayomot Sham Bishnat HaArbaim L'tzei Bnei Yisrael Meretz Mitzrayim B'chodesh HaChamishi in the 5th month. Be'echad lachodesh on Rosh Chodesh, the 1st of the month, the 5th month. We call it Rosh Chodesh Av on page 204 in the Tanakh. Are you with me? If you're not now, you're going to lose the next thing. It's like the rest of this year is like wasting your time. The Torah tells us this story in its place in Parshat Chukat, but at the end of the book of Bamidbar, it's like a review of all the places Jewish people went to. And some of them, it just tells you the place name, and sometimes it tells you, oh, and here's what happened here. And when it gets to the story of the death of Aaron, it gives you the exact date. It tells you the 40th year in the 5th month on Rosh Chodesh. And then it says that he died. Okay? Okay? Now, turning just literally 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pages or so to Sefer Dvarim, Perek Aleph, page 210 of the Koren Tanakh. Dvarim Perek Aleph. Sefer Dvarim opens with a description of where the Jewish people are and when Moshe spoke this book to the Jewish people. And it describes that he's in Even HaYarden. And it describes specifically the date. Chapter 1, page 210, chapter 1 of Devarim, Pasuk Gimel. Vayhi ba'arba'im shana. It was the 40th year. Ba'ashtei asar chodesh be'echad lachodesh. Diber Moshe. It was the 40th year in the 11th month. What's the 11th month in our language? Nope. 11. Nope.
It's got to be Adar.
Teves.
12. What?
Shvat.
Finally, Shvat. It's Rosh Chodesh Shvat. So in the 40th year, at the 5th month, which we call Av, Aaron died. And in the 11th month, Moshe Shvat, Av, so Av, Elul, Tishrei, underline that word, Mar Cheshvan, Kislev, Teve, Shvat. So it was the 40th year in year 5, in the 5th month, and it's the 40th year in the 11th month. So it crossed through Tishrei. Did it change the year to 41? No. Therefore, it can't be that from 5 till 11, we're changing the year. Whatever happens between Av, Elul, Tishrei, Mar Cheshvan, Kislev, Shvat is the same year. What? But ask Steve Cohen, who clearly in his neshama is into the Gemara in ways he doesn't even understand. What if, because it's possible, the 11th month, Shvat, in the 40th year, was before, except for the following detail. This is the clincher. I don't know if you read ahead, but you just asked, like, I couldn't imagine a better, like, layup question. Steve Cohen, remember, you heard it here first. He said it. What is the next thing that the Torah tells us? Look at this. When was this 11th month in the 40th year? Look what it says. Just unbelievable. Acharei hakoto et Sichon melech Amori asher yoshev becheshbon ve'et Og melech Bashan asher yoshev b'Ashtarot be'edrei. After Moshe, then the Jewish people smote, they struck down Sichon and Og. Are you with me now? Now, hold. You're going to flip back now. There was a method to my madness. Go back to chapter 21 in Bamidbar, where the story is with no date, page 186. Let's go back 186, chapter 20 of Sefer Bamidbar. Look at what happens in chapter 20, verse 22 to 29. Aaron dies. And you know what happens after that? Turn the page to page 187. It turns out there is on verse 21, there's a king who is the king known as the king's name Sichon, who is the king of Emori, and he's very much alive. And there's a war with him, and he gets killed. And then you turn the page to page 188, and you know what happens? There's another war. And you know who that war is with? Og melech Bashan, and he gets killed.
But and
let me just say, well, hold on. Let me just say, well, hold on. Before Ronnie throws the monkey wrench in to get us back to the conversation, let's just get this level down pat. What Steve suggested is maybe 11th month of the 40th year, is before the 5th month, right? So it was 11, 12, because forget the numbers are just numbers. 11, 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and maybe 7 is really the new year, 41st year. But for one problem, when it said the 11th month of the 40th year, it said that Sichon and Og were already dead. In the 5th month of the 40th year, though, Sichon and Og were very much still alive. Ergo, says the Gemara, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 must be the same year, because when Aaron died, right after he died, Sichon and Og are still in the mix. And then, all those months later, after the war with Sichon and Og, Moshe starts to explain the Torah to the Jewish people, and that's the 11th month. So the Gemara seems to say, Ronnie, hold your point, but seems to say, QED, that tells us Tishrei is not it. And therefore, what are we going to revert back to? Nisan. But of course, the Gemara is not going to content itself with that. It's going to start saying, well, then how do we know it's Nisan? Maybe it's another month. It can't be in one period, though. It can't be between the 5th month and the 11th month. Why not? Because there's no turnover of year there. You follow?
This is all based on Yetziat Mitzrayim. That all the time we spent in the desert is based on Yetziat Mitzrayim. So all these years are based on Yetziat Mitzrayim.
That is the working thesis, but it's not it is based on the years, which Nisan is when it happened. We're all conditioned to understand that, but the Gemara says, don't be so conditioned. That's the conclusion, but there's a whole discussion beforehand. How did we actually get there? It's not as simple as you would think. So for instance, as I was pointing out, you're going to see in the Gemara now, how do you know that it's not Matan Torah? How do you know it's not the making of the Mishkan? How do you know it's not the kapara on the Egel? How do you know? How do you know? Now we know right now, at least what we're up to, without Ronnie's question yet, between 5 and 11, it must be Sichon and Og are dead in the 11th month of the 40th year, and they were alive in the 5th month of that year. It's got to be the same year. They can't be dead and undead. So that's that. Mark?
If Ronnie asks his question, then I'm going to ask my question.
I don't want to admit Ronnie's question because it's for later in the Gemara. I have to read a few more lines. So
correctly making an assumption that the count of the year and the reign of the king are correlated when we're having this discussion? And because
count of the year and the reign of the king? No,
no, right now,
not necessarily. Yeah.
Right, we have the king's reign. If I was writing a document,
Right.
the king's reign would start, root whatever, Shlomo, whatever.
Mhm.
And if I dated that document in, I don't know, ER, it'd be Nisan 1, it would be the reign of Shlomo.
2nd month of, okay, fine.
But the calendar year number doesn't change.
Right.
Tishrei. So if you're telling me the calendar year doesn't change in Tishrei, because we just went from 5 to.
That's what we're saying here on the documents.
But in order to tie that back to king, we're making the assumption that those two are somehow correlated when they're not.
I lost you somewhere here. The
Okay.
two dates that are not correlated.
Right, meaning.
Why can't the king have one date and the history is another?
Right, it does. That's what I'm saying.
The reason why it does, though, is because the working assumption of Rabbi Yochanan was, why did the pasuk put Yetziat Mitzrayim together with the reign of Shlomo to tell you that they both start in the same month, beginning of Nisan? That's the beginning of the count. But then the Gemara said, but how do you know that's true? Since we all know that the beginning of years generally from Briat HaOlam, let's take, as Rashi said, is actually Tishrei.
Right, the year wasn't.
What wasn't?
The year count didn't change in Tishrei.
There was a challenge and now it was refuted. Exactly. The point is that the Mishnah gives us 2 out of the 4 Rosh Hashanahs that we're focused on now is the one in Nisan and one in Tishrei.
Right.
So how do we know that the count, even of Yetziat Mitzrayim, was actually taken from Nisan? Because it happened then? Well, let me ask you, if the king was coronated in Adar, would you start counting then? The answer would be no. Starts at the beginning of Nisan. That's what we say. But how do you know that's true for Yetziat Mitzrayim? Now, in the end, Sully's right. That's how it works. It goes according to that. We all know that. But the Gemara says, but could we poke holes in that? Is there something, it's a little bit weird about that. So maybe it's Tishrei. How come? Why are we picking on Tishrei? Rashi thinks that's Briat HaOlam time. At least Rabbi Eliezer thinks that as well. And it says in the Mishnah, Rosh Hashanah for Shanim is at that time. But the interesting thing is, when there were kings, we didn't date according to Tishrei, we dated according to the kings in Nisan. And why should that be? Oh, because Yetziat Mitzrayim. Well, now we're going in circles. How do you know Yetziat Mitzrayim's count actually happens from there?
I guess you just said what I'm feeling. I'm feeling this circular logic here that just, I can't get away from.
Okay. But you would have said, maybe, I don't put words in your mouth, but wouldn't it just be simpler to say, date everything according to how we count years? What year is it now? Someone asks you what year it is. You say, oh, it's 5784. So when you write a document, you write 5784. Right? Okay. Here's the problem. I mentioned this like a couple of weeks ago. It's not clear that people really were using a count from Briat HaOlam in terms of knowing the number of years since Briat HaOlam. That came up like later. So they knew, oh, Rosh Hashanah, it's a new year since creation. How many years ago was that? Some number of years ago. I don't know. It wasn't, they didn't think of the terminology of, well, what year is it? They weren't counting years just by cycles of the sun. They were counting years by cycles of kings. That was the rulership that they could see and know about. Now you'll ask me, how did they keep who was the king that they were using before David, before Shaul? Ani lo yodea. I'm assuming they were keeping account. This is my assumption I got from Rav Meidan. I think it's right. They were using Yetziat Mitzrayim, which is why when it gets to Shlomo, it says 480 years in Yetziat Mitzrayim, because that was the date everybody, oh yeah, what year is it? Well, you count according to the years of your history. So when did time start for you? Well, there was a time before time, but we don't know. But when did time start? When we were liberated from Egypt. That's the first month. That's the beginning of time. Year 1, year 2, year 3, like Sully said, year 40th year since Yetziat Mitzrayim. And it would make sense to say, oh, so then year 480 was a year, but is also the year of so-and-so of the king. Why was it more challenging for David, by the way? I can tell you very simply, because the first 7.5 years for David, he rules in Hebron. Then he goes up to Yerushalayim. So like in the middle of his reign, they're going to, what year is it? It's year 8. Year 8? Well, years 1 through 7. Oh, he was in Hebron then. Now he's in Yerushalayim. Like complicated. Shlomo, when he started, Shlomo, everybody knew it was him. You understand what I'm saying? In other words, in the days of Shaul and into David, there's still a little shape-shiftiness. I don't know what else to call it. Who's running things? Then David takes over. He consolidates. He goes up to Yerushalayim. But how's he going to announce what the year is? Year 1 of my reign, because I came to Yerushalayim, is actually year 8. It was 7.5 years. It's into year 8 when he's there. But when Shlomo starts to reign, now the two systems can amalgamate. 480 of Yetziat Mitzrayim, year 2 of Shlomo, year 4 of Shlomo, excuse me. That fits. But what the Gemara is saying is, yeah, but you're skipping a little step. How do we know that the enumeration of years of Yetziat Mitzrayim actually goes by Nisan? And even though you would think, well, so obviously go by Nisan, that's when it happened, Lav Davka. You know why? Because maybe people who knew that Rosh Hashanah was always in Tishrei thought, they told them, listen, you know that the world is created in Tishrei, let's say, it's a machloket, but let's say, and therefore, Mark, you still with me? Did I lose you totally? Right? Therefore, you know when we'll start the dating of Yetziat Mitzrayim? Not in Nisan, because you're not accustomed to that, but you know there's a thing called Rosh Hashanah every year in Tishrei. That's when you'll start. That's the beginning. That's year 1. And after that, that's already year 2. You follow? In other words, they could have made that convention, but they didn't. It's 2 separate calendars in a way from the get-go. The Shanim is Tishrei, and the Malachim is Nisan. Why is Malachim Nisan? That's what we're up. That's what we're up to here. And months 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, we have in the Torah, chapter 33 in Bamidbar, and then chapter 1 in Dvarim tells us month 5, month 11, and in month 11 it says, oh, by the way, it was after the death of these 2 kings. But those 2 kings are alive when Aaron dies. In fact, the 2 kings, who may really be 3 kings, in fact, or may just be 2 kings, they war with the Jewish people, possibly, and not entirely unlikely, because Aaron died. They thought they could get in. I talked about this on Shabbos in the Shir on war. So, are you with me still? Did I lose everyone completely? Right? Just because the story happened at a certain time doesn't mean that's the beginning of the count. Maybe the beginning of the count, I mean, it starts then, but maybe there's another arbitrary or not arbitrary line in the calendar, which when you cross it, it becomes year 2. Just like we said with kings. The king started on the 15th of Adar, but 15 days later, now it's year 2. But he only did 15 days. So what? Okay, that's how it works. So they left Mitzrayim, or you could say it differently. The king became the king in Mar Cheshvan or in Kislev. They had a Hanukkah inauguration. But when was year 2? When he hit Nisan. It wasn't the full year. Doesn't matter. The Jewish people, so I'm saying the same sentence again. The Jewish people got out of Mitzrayim in Nisan, but when was it a full year in quotation marks? When they hit Tishrei. That was the full year. Now it's year 2. Maybe.
That's what you had with Shlomo. He took over in Sivan when David died on Shavuos.
Right. So that year is year 1, which is also the 40th year of David. That's the overlap.
Right.
Look in the Gemara with me. You'll see what the Gemara said here. The Gemara pointed this out. The Gemara quoted this quote, and it said, Midakai ba'av, I'm about 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 lines up from the bottom. Midakai ba'av, the first word in the line is Vigomer, quoting that pasuk. But then Midakai ba'av, Vikari Lashnat Arba'im, Vikari B'Shvat, Vikari Lashnat Arba'im, Michad Rosh Hashanah Lav Tisrehu. Right? So it seems pretty obvious. It's 40. So the Gemara says, wait, Bishlama Hayach, Mefarsh Litziat Mitzrayim. Elahami Maid Litziat Mitzrayim, Dimla Kamada Mishkan. How do you know that actually, I skipped this question. I went to the Sichon one, but because the one that comes before. How do you know that when it refers to the 40th year in the case of there's the Yetziat Mitzrayim count, there's 40 years since Mitzrayim, maybe there's also a count that started when they had a Kamad HaMishkan. Maybe that's another year. Doing like on Mishkan. Kedam Rav Papa, Shnat Esrim, Gzera Shava. There's a place we'll see further along where it says the 20th year. Hachanami, Shnat Arba'im Shana, Shnat Arba'im. 2 places, Shnat Arba'im. Gzera Shava. Ma Kanli Yetziat Mitzrayim. Av Kanli Yetziat Mitzrayim. The Gemara says, when you look at the foundation of the Mishkan, that happened in Nisan in year 2 from Yetziat Mitzrayim. But maybe it reset the clock. Maybe. And maybe there is a 41st year that comes later. The Jewish people are in 41 years in the desert on the account of Yetziat Mitzrayim, even though it's 40 years, maybe the 40 years refers to Hakamad HaMishkan. The Gemara says, no. If it said 40 years here and 40 years there, and in one place it says specifically it's from Yetziat Mitzrayim, the other place it must mean it also. Just like a Gemara we haven't gotten to, 20 years and 20 years, it's the same, it's exactly the same time. And the Gemara then says, Kadim, that's Steve's question. Dila Masi the Shvat Kadim. How do you know the story in Shvat, beginning of Dvarim, didn't happen earlier? The Gemara answers, Lo Sakadar, don't think that. Dichtiv, Achareya Kotot Sichon. Right? V'chinach nafshe de Aaron, Akati have a Sichon Kayam. Yeah, Sichon was still alive. It says so. But then the Gemara does something fascinating. It says, Dichtiv, Vayishma Knani Melech Arad, Mashmu Shama, Shama Shemet Aaron, V'nistalku Anane Kavod. The king, the Knani, heard, the king of Arad. What is it that he heard? He heard that Aaron died and that the clouds of glory had moved away. He thought that now he was going to be able to fight against the Jewish people. And therefore he started up with the Jewish people. And then it says, it says in the pasuk, Vayiru kol ha'eda ki gava Aaron. The people saw that Aaron had died. We'll look that up in a minute. It's on page 186. Not that they saw, but that they were seen. They were visible. How come? Because they're no longer protective clouds. Ki gava Aaron. Ki gava Aaron. So kideresh lakish. Damaresh lakish. Ki mishamish bedal l'shono. Ki can mean one of 4 things. E means like maybe. Dilma, since. Ella, rather. Deha, because. Mi dami hatam Canaan. Hacha sichon. Why are you comparing Canaan and Sichon? It says the king of Canaan and not Sichon. So Tana hu Sichon hu Arad. Hu Canaan, Sichon, shedom l'sayach, b'midbar, b'midbar, Canaan Hashem malchuto. Umashmo Arad shmo. So the Gemara here has a whole drasha to try to show that the Canaani is actually Sichon. I'm getting to Ronnie's question in closing in just a minute. Look with me on page 186. 186, go back to 186. And you'll see what the Gemara has been talking about here. Because if you don't see the psukim, it's like, what's the point? Look at page 186, chapter 20, verse 29. Pasuk Chavtet. Yeah. Vayiru kol ha'ida ki gava Aaron. Vayivku et Aaron shloshim yom kol Beit Yisrael. The whole nation saw that Aaron died. There are many beautiful midrashim about the sad and beautiful midrashim. But the Gemara darshaned here, Vayiru means not that they saw, but that somehow they were made visible. Because there's the Anaya Kavod, 4 clouds on all cardinal points, plus one above, one below, had dissipated when Aaron died. You'll ask me, why was that necessary? I don't know. That was in the schut of Aaron. So how come it couldn't be in the schut of someone else? I don't know. They didn't have it, and therefore they were visible. And therefore the next pasuk, chapter 21, verse 1, Vayishma Knani Melech Arad Yoshev HaNegev, Ki Ba Yisrael Derech HaAtarim, Vayilachem B'Yisrael, Vayish Mimenu Shevi. The first time the Jewish people, as a nation, happened to us as family, but here as a nation, had captives taken. Abductions. Sound familiar? Vayidar Yisrael Neder Lashem Vayomar, Im Natonti Tinad Ama Zebi Adi Vachramti et Arihem, Vayishma Hashem B'Kol Yisrael, Vayitin et Knani, Vayacharem et Hem, et Arihem, Vayikra Hashem Makom Chorma. Rashi on this pasuk on the Torah, and Tosfot here on our page, tells us that the Knaani being referenced here is Amalek. Amalek lives in the Negev. Amalek decided to take on the language of Canaan in order to fool the Jews. They wouldn't realize it was Amalek. Amalek took captives. Does this sound familiar? Amalek took captives, and the Jewish people said, "We're going to go after them and help us, Hashem. We're not going to take any spoils of war from them, so you won't claim that we went in for treasure. We only did it to save our people and to destroy the enemy." Rashi on Vayish Mimenu Shevi points out, not like the Pashtanim who understand it means captives were taken, but Vayish Mimenu Shevi means for one person. There was one maidservant who was taken captive, and on that, the Jewish people were willing to go to war. Al Kama Vakama, when it's many, many more people. Just interesting. It's a war against Amalek. That's what Rashi describes, and Tosfot here in the Gemara describes that. After this story, there's a sad story about the Jewish people with the mun, with the snakes. It's also a little bit in the wake of what happened with Aaron. They're upset with what happened with Aaron. Suddenly they're complaining. They had to fight a war just now. How did an enemy get captives? It's because Aaron died and there was no protection. Now this happened. And what's next? They were sad and bad things happen. There's a plague, right? Then comes I'm skipping a part, obviously. Then comes chapter 21, after the fiery copper serpent. Chapter 21, verse 21. Then the Jewish people send emissaries to Sichon. Can we pass through your land? Sichon responds by bringing out the entire army. They lose the battle against the Jewish people. They war against the Jewish people. They start up. Jewish people fight a defensive war. They win. Og Melech HaBashan decides he's going to have a go. Moshe's nervous. Hashem tells him, don't be afraid. It's all in Parshat Chukat. And the Jewish people will win the war against Og. I spoke about this on Shabbos in this shir about war before Mincha and last Thursday, and it's archived online, wherever. So the point is, there's 3 wars, Knani, Sichon, and Og. But the Gemara actually conflates the story of the Melech HaKnani and the war with Sichon, excuse me. Why does it do that? Is the second question. The first question is, how does it do that? And how it does that is by saying that the name Sichon means that he is like a wild colt or a young animal, a young horse, a sayach. So he's, how do you pronounce it? Did I pronounce it correctly? Siach, yeah, siach. So wild, and his name was Arad. And he's there, and that's his kingdom, and the kingdom was called Emori, and that's what the Gemara describes. And Sichon Sayach Bamidbar, Canaan Shemach. Oh, sorry, the kingdom is called Canaan, and his name is Arad. And it conflates those two people. On the level of Pshat, that's not the case. But on the level of Medrash, of the Gemara, it conflates. Now, how could it conflate the two? Now we're back to Ronnie's question, is because the question, when we look at the Torah, and we see different sections, A, B, C, D, they're lined up, 1, 2, 3, right? Are those in chronological order? According to the Ramban, for sure they're in chronological order. According to many, many, many Parshat Mikra, they're in order. But some Parshat Mikra wonder sometimes, is there this idea of Ein Mukdam Muchar B'Torah? Is there sometimes later and earlier are not actually in chronological order? Maybe they're thematic. Maybe the title of the next section is Wars the Jewish People Fought. And it's not that it happened exactly after Aaron died. Maybe there's other issues at play. So it's possible. My best understanding of this is, if I'm right, chapter 21, Parakhaf Aleph, Psukim Aleph, Bet and Gimel, is the overview of the story of the war and how they won. Not how they won. The overview of the story with Canaan, with this person in Canaani. It's not the pshat, but the Gemara says, and then who was that? Oh, that must be Sichon, who's on the next page after that. They're doing this to conflate the two in order to show the juxtaposition. Apparently, rabbis like to use the word juxtaposition a lot. I don't, but there are rabbis like that. The death of Aaron, the war with Canaan, and the Gemara wants to know that war with Canaan is really the war with Sichon. The title of it, the sort of the coming attractions, there's a war with Canaan that happened right after the death of Aaron, but I'll tell you about it in detail soon. First, I have to tell you about another after effect of sad things that happened, which was the complaints about the man. Why is the Gemara doing that? Simple, because of Steve's issue and because of Ronnie's question, which is, if you say Torah, maybe these stories did happen before Aaron died. But if you say that the death of Aaron led to different people hearing that there's no longer protection for the Jewish people, and that was the catalyst to have them attack the Jewish people, and if it will so happen that king happens to be the king named Sichon, then the words Acharei Hakoto, Devarim chapter 1, Acharei Hakoto et Sichon melech ha'emori ve'og melech ha'bashan, that must be right after, but not before the death of Aaron. You follow? So the Gemara tries to show how, from a perspective of the words of the Torah, the 5th month, death of Aaron, must have preceded the death of Sichon, because the death of Sichon was the war Sichon started under his other name, Arad. His kingdom was called Canaan. Now, you'll tell me this is not the pshat, but you're right. It's not the pshat. It's not trying to be the pshat. It's trying to show that 5, 6, 7, 8, because in the end of the story, which is really how we started, we know that it's going to go according to Nisan, but we were trying to rule out, how do we know it's not Tishrei? The answer is it's right here. And if you're going to try to argue, as Ronnie might have tried to argue, well, so maybe the war with the Kanaani and Sichon and Og happened while Aaron was still alive. You should be aware, that's the Gemara's kind of preempting as Ronnie's question, that really the catalyst for the war of the Kanaani, aka Sichon, who is the Siach HaMidbar, that catalyst was the death of Aaron. So Aaron is dead before those nations start up. You see the order? And therefore, it can't be that Tishrei, though people in the world, if you ask them, when's Rosh Hashanah, they're not thinking about Rosh Chodashim, they're thinking about Rosh Hashanah. In Tishrei, it's not actually referring to the king and his start time or the order of the months in the Torah, which is following the months since Yetziat Mitzrayim. We'll have to stop here because we're way over time and I'm going to be late for my 8:30 meeting. But the next section of the Gemara, which we'll hopefully get to next week, is there's an Ika de Amre that says Arad Shedomela Aroda Midbar Kanal Shemachuto Mashmo Sichon Shmo. It's another rendering of Arad because he's like a wild donkey, and Canaan, that's his kingdom, and Sichon is his name. And we'll get to the next one next week just to make things more complex. We'll start with the words Ve'ema Rosh Hashanah ER. I'll say no, it can't be ER either. We have to come back for that next week. Ad Khan for tonight. Thanks for joining.